Are you absolutely sure you are alone in your room right now?
Every night at 2 a.m., we heard dragging noises coming from beneath the floorboards. We told ourselves it was just the scariest thing isn't seeing a ghost. It's waking up at 3 a.m. because you feel someone watching you.
There is a specific, primal violation that comes with the realization that you are being watched. It isn't just the fear of physical danger. It is the sudden stomach-churning knowledge that your privacy or most vulnerable moments have been stolen by someone else. We all like to think we are safe behind locked doors, but sometimes the danger is already inside the room with us. Here are 3 disturbing true stories about hidden cameras that will make you check your vents and mirrors before you try to sleep tonight. Story 1. I was 22 when this happened. It was a weird transitional period in my life. I had just graduated college, I was effectively between jobs, and I was scrambling to do just about any odd work I could find around my small town. I was babysitting, cleaning gutters, running errands, basically anything that paid cash. A woman I had dog sat for in the past recommended me to a friend of her neighbors, a man named Craig. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He explained that he was going to be traveling for business for a week and needed someone to stay at his house to look after his golden retriever, Max. He emphasized that Max was an incredibly anxious dog who didn't do well being left alone at night, so he needed a live-in sitter, rather than someone just dropping by to feed him. The pay he offered was significantly higher than the going rate, so I agreed without hesitation. I met Craig 2 days later. He was in his late 40s, tall, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a generic navy winter. Nothing about him screamed danger at first glance. If anything, he was just a little overly friendly, a bit socially awkward, but not necessarily creepy. His house was situated on the absolute edge of town, tucked back into a dense wooded area. You had to drive down a long gravel lane to get there, and the trees created a canopy that blocked out most of the sun. The house itself was nice, if a little dated, lots of beige carpets and heavy floral curtains. Craig walked me through the routine, how often to let Max out, where the spare key was hidden, and which food in the fridge was fair game. He showed me to the guest bedroom, which was located on the first floor, right off the living room. It was a simple room with a queen bed and an old oak dresser. I started the job on a Monday. The first 2 nights were completely uneventful. I fell into a boring routine, watching TV in the living room until 10, taking Max for a final lap around the yard, and then sleeping in the guest room with the dog curled up at the foot of the bed. It was quiet, almost too quiet, given how isolated the house was, but I enjoyed the solitude. It was the 3rd night, Wednesday, when the atmosphere shifted. I was sitting on the bed, just scrolling through social media on my phone, when I noticed something odd. On the dresser across from the bed, sitting next to a small ceramic lamp, was a digital alarm clock. I had seen it there for the last 2 days, but I hadn't really looked at it. I remember thinking it didn't match the rest of the room. The entire house was stuck in the late 90s doilies, wood paneling, old tube TVs. But this clock looked brand new. It was sleek, black plastic, with a bright blue LED display. I don't know what made me look closer. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was just the way the light from the bedside lamp hit the front face of the device. I leaned forward, squinting. Above the digital numbers, there was a small, perfectly round black dot. At first, I brushed it off. I thought it was a light sensor, or maybe the snooze button. But then I noticed the angle. The clock was positioned slightly askew on the dresser, turned so that the face and that tiny black dot was pointed directly at the pillows on the bed. My stomach dropped. It was a physical sensation, like missing a step on a staircase. I had read horror stories online about hidden cameras in Airbnbs and hotels, but I had never actually seen one. My mind started racing, trying to rationalize it. Don't be paranoid, I told myself. It's just a clock. I got up and walked over to the dresser. I picked it up. It was heavier than a cheap plastic clock should be. As I held it, I heard a very faint, high-pitched whining sound, almost like a tiny cooling fan or electronic interference. I turned it toward me and stared right into that pinhole. It wasn't a sensor. Behind the dark plastic, I could see the glint of a glass lens. Sound of a low, suspenseful drone. That was the moment the reality of the situation crashed down on me. I was being recorded, and if this was a live feed, Craig was watching me right now. Max, who had been lying by the bedroom door, suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked up, and he let out a low, trembling whine. from somewhere else in the house, not the front door, but deeper inside. Near the kitchen I heard the unmistakable click of a door handle releasing, followed by the soft thud of a door closing. Every hair on my arm stood up. The air left my lungs. Craig wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday. It was Wednesday, and that sound hadn't come from outside. It had come from the basement or the garage entrance. I froze, holding the clock in my trembling hands. Then, I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the hallway carpet. Thump, thump, thump. They were moving toward the living room. Toward me. I quickly set the clock back down, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it, and I lunged for the bedroom door. I slammed it shut and twisted the lock just as the footsteps stopped on the other side. For 5 seconds, there was total silence. Then, the doorknob jiggled. "Hey!" Craig's voice came through the wood. It was calm, but slightly breathless. I left something in there last time I was home. I need you to open the door." I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it had been stuffed with cotton. A moment later he spoke again, his voice dropping an octave. "It's not what you think. That clock, it's just a motion sensor for the dog. I didn't want to freak you out by mentioning it." I backed away from the door, my hands clamped over my mouth to keep from screaming. He was lying. I knew what a camera looked like. "Come on out," he said. "Let's talk like adults." When I didn't respond, the polite facade vanished. A heavy fist pounded against the door, shaking the frame. "Open the door," he yelled. The calmness was gone, replaced by a sharp, aggressive anger. "Open the damn door." Max started barking wildly, jumping at the door, which only seemed to make Craig more agitated. I could hear him fumbling with something on the other side, maybe keys. I spun around and looked at the window. It was a single hung sash window, low enough to the ground to climb out, but I knew I had locked it my first night there. "If you don't open this door," Craig shouted, "I'm getting the spare key, and I'm calling the cops to tell them you broke into my house." I didn't wait to hear the rest of his threats. I scrambled over the bed and fumbled with the window latch. My hands were shaking so violently, it took me 3 tries to slide the lock open. Behind me, the doorknob rattled violently. He was trying to force it. I shoved the window up. The cool night air hit my face. I punched out the screen, climbed awkwardly over the sill, and dropped onto the wet grass outside. I turned back and whispered for Max. The dog scrambled onto the bed, his nails clicking on the ledge, but he wouldn't jump. He just whined, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. The bedroom door crashed open behind him. I turned and ran. I ran through the dark side yard, my feet slipping on the wet grass, sprinting down the long gravel driveway until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out and dialed my mum, who lived 15 minutes away. I was sobbing so hard she could barely understand me, but I managed to tell her to come get me. By the time she pulled up, I was hiding behind a cluster of mailboxes a quarter-mile down the road. Craig's house was nowhere in sight, but I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that windbreaker emerging from the darkness. We went straight to the police station, but the outcome was frustratingly anticlimactic. The next morning, I called a lawyer. He told me that without physical proof like the actual device or the footage charges would be nearly impossible to stick. Even if the clock was a camera, Craig could claim it was for security, or that I was mistaken. I wanted to go back. I wanted to storm in there and take a picture of it, but my lawyer strongly advised against returning to that house. And honestly, the thought of seeing Craig's face again made me physically ill. I never got paid for those 3 nights. The woman who recommended me stopped responding to my texts, and I never found out if she knew what kind of man Craig really was. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about waking up to the sound of a shutter clicking. I started checking every clock, smoke detector, and picture frame in my own apartment. I still think about that moment staring into that little black lens, and hearing the door close deep inside a house that was supposed to be empty. It means he wasn't away on business. He was there, the whole time waiting. Transition sound, wind howling, fading into silence. Story 2. My girlfriend Emma and I had been planning a getaway for months. We booked an Airbnb in late September, just a week before we planned to visit her sister, in a small town about 3 hours north. I picked the place because it was affordable, had decent reviews, and the photos looked incredibly cozy. It was an old, 2-story farmhouse, with a wraparound porch, warm yellow lighting, and hardwood floors. It looked like something out of a storybook. There was only one small detail in the listing description that I didn't think much of at the time. A note explicitly stating that the basement storage room was strictly off-limits. I've stayed in plenty of Airbnbs where owners keep a closet or a garage locked for personal storage. It's normal. So, It barely registered as a red flag. When we pulled into the driveway just before sunset, the reality was a little different from the photos. The house was more weathered, the paint peeling in strips. It stood completely alone, surrounded by dark, dense trees. The nearest neighbor was a mile down the road. The host, a man named Alan, was waiting for us on the porch before we even turned off the ignition. Alan was tall, slightly hunched, maybe in his late 50s, with thin gray hair combed aggressively over a bald spot. He was dressed in a flannel shirt tucked neatly into jeans. He smiled as we walked up the steps, but it was the kind of smile that involves the mouth but not the eyes. It felt practiced. His eyes lingered on Emma just a second too long when we shook hands. His voice was friendly, but there was a subtle firmness to it. He led us inside. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, like old candle wax. He gave us the tour: living room, kitchen, bathroom. Then, he stopped at a heavy wooden door near the kitchen pantry. There was a large, heavy-duty padlock hanging from the latch. "This," Alan said, his voice dropping to a commanding tone, "stays locked. It's my storage space. There is absolutely no reason for you to go down there. Is that clear?" He wasn't smiling anymore. He stared at me, waiting for an answer. I nodded, feeling a sudden chill in the room. He immediately brightened back up, pointed out the extra towels, and wished us a pleasant stay before leaving. After he left, we tried to shake off the weird interaction. We unpacked, made tea, and sat on the porch. But by the time we got into bed, the silence of the countryside felt heavy. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I thought I heard a dull thud from below us. I held my breath, listening, but the sound didn't repeat. I told myself it was just the old house settling. The next day, we tried to enjoy ourselves. We went into town, had lunch with Emma's sister, and explored. We stayed out until after dark, dreading the return to the gloomy farmhouse. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to use the bathroom. As I walked back toward the bedroom, I froze in the hallway. Sound effect: heavy dragging noise on concrete. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. A dragging sound, heavy, gritty, like something being pulled across concrete. It lasted 5 seconds, stopped, and then started again. My first thought was that Alan had come back, but he had explicitly told us he wouldn't be on the property during our stay. I went into the bedroom and whispered, "Emma." "I heard it," she whispered back. She was sitting up, clutching the duvet. We stayed awake for another hour, straining our ears, but the house remained silent. The second night was worse. We had spent the day hiking and were exhausted, but around 2:30 a.m., the noises returned. This time, it wasn't dragging. It was footsteps. Thump. Thump. Then a pause. Then 3 more. The pauses were what terrified me. They were long enough to make me feel like whoever or whatever was down there was stopping to listen to us. Emma whispered that she thought she could hear breathing between the steps, though I think that was just our collective panic. We lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, until the sun came up. By the third morning, the atmosphere in the house was suffocating. I decided to investigate the basement door while the sun was out. It was still locked tight with that heavy padlock, but when I leaned close to the crack in the doorframe, I smelled something foul. It was stale, damp air, mixed with something sour like body odor and old food. That night, the noises began earlier, around midnight. First, a metallic clinking, like a spoon tapping against a pipe. Then, the pacing footsteps again. We barely slept. The fourth night was a breaking point. We were getting ready for bed. Emma was brushing her hair at the vanity when she stopped. She was staring at the reflection of the room in the mirror. "Joe," she said, her voice shaking, "does the smoke detector look weird to you?" I looked up. There was a standard white smoke detector mounted directly above the bed. "What do you mean?" "The light," she said. "It's not blinking red. It's solid green." I grabbed a chair and stood on it to get a closer look. My heart hammered against my ribs. In the center of the detector, disguised as a sensor, was a small, perfectly round lens. It was shinier than the plastic around it. A wave of nausea hit me. I grabbed the detector and twisted it off the mount. It wasn't hardwired. Inside, there was a battery pack and a small SD card slot. The green light was solid, meaning it was recording. Emma turned pale. "Check the rest," she whispered. I frantically searched the room. Within 5 minutes, I found another one, a tiny lens poking through a pinhole in the drywall, near the dresser mirror. Both cameras were aimed directly at the bed. That was it. We didn't even pack properly. We just shoved our clothes into our bags in chaotic armfuls. We ran out to the car, leaving the front door wide open, and drove to the nearest gas station to call 911. 2 officers met us there. We explained everything, The noises, the locked basement, the hidden cameras, they followed us back to the house. Because we had paid for the rental, we technically had the right to invite the police inside. They entered and seized the cameras. Then, we showed them the basement door. I expected it to still be locked, but the padlock was gone. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing a pitch-black staircase descending into the earth. "Stay here," one of the officers said. They drew their flashlights and went down. We stood in the kitchen, holding hands, listening. Moments later, we heard shouting. "Show me your hands." Right now, there was a commotion, the sound of things falling over, and then the heavy thud of someone being slammed against a wall. A few minutes later, the officers marched a man up the stairs in handcuffs. It was Alan. He looked disheveled, wild-eyed, nothing like the neat man who had greeted us. It turned out he hadn't been commuting from another home. He had been living in the basement the entire time. The police found a small closet down there, set up as a viewing station. There was a cot, a bucket, and a bank of monitors. He had been watching us live. The noises we heard, the dragging, the footsteps, that was him. Moving around beneath us while we slept, watching us on his screens. He was charged with criminal trespass and invasion of privacy. We didn't have to testify. The evidence was overwhelming. Airbnb gave us a refund and a voucher, essentially trying to bribe us into silence. But we never used it. We don't trust rentals anymore. We stick to hotels. But even now, when I hear a floorboard creak in the middle of the night, I can't help but wonder who might be listening. Transition sound, static buzz, sharp cut to silence. Story 3. My name is Joe, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate named Eric. I didn't know Eric before moving in. We met through a Facebook housing group. At the time, he seemed like the perfect roommate candidate. He was quiet, polite, maybe a little awkward, but responsible. I wasn't looking for a best friend, just someone who paid rent on time and didn't trash the kitchen. For the first few months, it was great. We had opposite schedules. I worked a standard 9 to 5, and he worked a night shift at a distribution warehouse. I barely saw him. His door was usually shut when I left, and he was gone when I got home. But then, I started noticing little things. The first incident was small. I came home late one Tuesday and noticed my closet door was wide open. I'm a creature of habit. I hate visual clutter, so I always keep that door shut. I figured I had just been careless that morning. A few days later, I came home and found my desk chair turned. It was facing the bed. I never sit in it that way. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but it planted a seed of unease in my gut. It felt like someone had been in my space. One Saturday morning, I decided to do a deep clean of my room. I was wiping down the baseboards and dusting the shelves. I climbed up on a step stool to clean the top of the window frame. That's when I saw it. Up in the corner, where the wall met the ceiling, there was a tiny black object. It blended in almost perfectly with a dark scuff mark on the paint. I leaned in close. It was a camera. A tiny, cube-shaped wireless camera, no bigger than a die, attached with a strip of adhesive. I froze. It was angled perfectly to capture the entire room, specifically my bed. Asterisk, my hands shook as I peeled it off the wall. It had a slot for a micro SD card, but the card was missing. I stood there on the step stool, clutching this tiny piece of plastic, feeling a wave of sickness wash over me. I thought about everything I did in this room, sleeping, changing clothes, private moments with girlfriends. The only person who could have put it there was Eric. He was the only other person with a key to the apartment. At that moment, Eric wasn't home, or at least, I didn't think he was. I walked out into the hallway and stared at his bedroom door. It was closed. I know I shouldn't have done it, but curiosity and anger took over. I turned his doorknob. It was unlocked at his room, smelled stale like dirty laundry and old takeout. The blinds were drawn tight, making it pitch black even at noon. I flipped the light switch. His room was a disaster zone of clutter. But on his desk, I saw a laptop and a stack of SD cards. I didn't touch them. I was too scared of what I might find. I backed out and closed the door. I needed to know for sure. I needed him to admit it. So, I came up with a plan. I took the camera and hid it in my nightstand drawer, buried under a pile of socks. If he came looking for it, I would know. For 2 nights, nothing happened. The apartment was tense. I locked my bedroom door every time I went to sleep. But I barely slept. Then came the 3rd night. I woke up around 3 a.m. I wasn't sure what woke me at first, but then I heard it. A soft sliding sound. S-H-H-H-H-K. It was coming from right beside my head. My eyes snapped open, but I didn't move. In the faint orange light filtering through the street lamps outside, I saw a silhouette dot. It was Eric. He was standing inside my room. He had picked the lock. He was bent over my nightstand, his hand deep in the drawer, rummaging through my socks. He was looking for his camera. My heart hammered so hard against my ribs I thought he'd hear it. I lay there, paralyzed, watching him through slitted eyes. Suddenly, he stopped. He went completely still. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he turned his head. He looked down at the bed. He was looking directly at me. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, he spoke. His voice was a flat, monotone whisper. "I know you're awake." Ice water flooded my veins. I sat up, scrambling backward against the headboard, switching from fear to defensive anger. "What the hell are you doing, Eric?" He didn't flinch. He just stood there, his hand still hovering over the open drawer. "Where is it?" he asked. "Why is there a camera in my room?" I shouted. "Get out." He stared at me, his expression blank. "I thought you were stealing from me," he said. "That is complete bull," I yelled. "You aimed it at my bed. That is sick, Eric. That is absolutely sick." "I just wanted proof," he said, stepping closer. "I'm calling the police," I threatened. Though my phone was on the desk across the room, I lunged for the drawer, grabbed the camera, and held it up. "This is proof. You're never getting this back." I jumped out of bed, expecting a fight, but he just watched me. I stormed past him, ran into the kitchen, and threw the tiny camera deep into the trash can, covering it with garbage. "Stay out of my room," I screamed. "I'm telling the landlord everything tomorrow." Eric stood in the hallway, his fists clenched at his sides. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into his room, slamming the door. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with a baseball bat, watching his door dot the next morning. I checked the garbage. The camera was gone. He had dug it out while I was in the bathroom. That was a week ago. I told the landlord, but he said without police involvement or physical evidence. He couldn't just kick a tenant out immediately. He said he'd look into it. So, Eric still lives here. We don't speak. But the way he looks at me when we pass in the kitchen makes my skin crawl. It's a look of pure hatred. I'm looking for a new place, obviously. I'm moving out as soon as I can. But last night was the worst. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard footsteps come down the hallway. They stopped right outside my door. For 5 minutes, there was silence. No knocking, no movement, just the faint creak of the floorboards shifting under his weight. He was just standing there, inches away from the wood, listening to me breathe. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what he recorded. But I know that until I get out of this apartment, I am never, ever truly alone. Altar music. Dark. Rhythmic bass. Pulsing, slowly fading out.